Hello and welcome to Practical Inclusion across whatever platform you happen to be watching us on, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook or YouTube. I want to start today's session by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that I get to live, work and play on, which is the Wadawurrung people. Currently, Wadawurrung country, particularly in the area that I am, is experiencing some flooding. The Barwon River looks incredible and majestic, but has also obviously broken its banks multiple times over the last month. So what does it remind me? It's constantly reminding me of the need to tap into the knowledge that First Nations people have about how we should be caring for this country, not the way we're currently caring for this country and for the world more broadly. So a big call out to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who happen to be watching us today live or on the replay. Let's jump straight in to today's session and today's content. And I can see lots of people RSVP'd for this session. So if you're watching us live, we'd love to see comments, questions, reflections pop up in the chat. And if we can address them live, we will absolutely do that. But if you're watching on the replay, please feel free to do that as well. It's great to see the conversations that continue on these sessions after they've occurred and the further learning and reflections and story sharing that's happening. So that's really highly encouraged. Stacey is our guest today. I'm going to throw to Stacey, as I usually do, to introduce herself through story and provide her own acknowledgement as well. Hi, Stacey.
Hi, Bree. Thanks so much for inviting me on today. I am privileged to live and work on unceded Kaurna country here in beautiful Adelaide, South Australia. And I would like to express my gratitude to the traditional owners for the sharing of this land and my sadness at the cost of that sharing. And I pay my respects to the Kaurna elders, past and present. I think also in the spirit of trauma-informed practice, a heads up for viewers today that are joining us that the conversation relates to domestic, family and sexual violence. And it may be triggering for some people. So I'd like to also acknowledge all people who have a lived experience of domestic, family and or sexual violence and honour them for their incredible courage and resilience, and to express my grief and fury that so far in Australia, 40 women have been murdered in 2022, and that's 40 women too many.
Yeah, thanks, Stacey, for that reminder. And for those viewers, if you do need to plug out, obviously do that and put your self-care first. Stacey, I'm really keen to get you to tell us a little bit about yourself and why we might be having this conversation today.
Yeah, thanks. So it was almost 9 years ago, in the wee hours of a Monday morning, I ended my 3.5-year abusive relationship by calling the police to come and save me and my kids from a life-threatening situation. Six police wearing bulletproof vests with tasers humming entered the house and arrested my partner, with him yelling threats to find me and kill me as he was carted off. Within days, the courts had bailed him to no known address and, however, ended up at a friend's place, which was just a 2-minute drive from mine. The police were really concerned, obviously, about this situation, and they came and despite having been provided duress alarms and various other measures to safeguard myself at my home, the police felt that it was critical that I disappear. And so I spent 2 weeks interstate before I had to come back to return to work. You see, I'd used all my sick leave and all my annual leave during the time because of the way that the abuse had manifested and occurred in that time. But I was fortunate to have been at my workplace, which was in local government, for some time. And so I had some long service leave to draw on, which was really fortunate. Otherwise, I would have had to flee the state in financial crisis, as well as the other crisis that I was experiencing. And then, 9 years ago, there was no domestic violence leave, and it was incredibly new for workplaces to really start being aware around the impacts of domestic violence in the workplace. But my workplace tried to be really supportive, but in some ways caused further trauma, especially when I returned to work with an intervention order, which is what we call apprehended violence orders, or they're called different things around the country. And so my ex wasn't allowed within 200 metres of myself, my children, my house and my workplace. And so as I didn't know where he was, I was still in deep fear. Well, I knew where he was living at the time, but certainly he wasn't working. So he could have been anywhere during the day. And the police advised me to change my routines and all of those sorts of things. So I was like a deer in the headlights, living in the midst of post-traumatic stress disorder and fearing for my life. So when I turned up for work on day one and presented my intervention order to my manager, who then wanted to go into detail about my time. And he then asked me to take that intervention order to HR. And so I had to repeat my situation to the person in HR, who then asked me to take that intervention order to security. And so I had to repeat my story and felt very embarrassed and very ashamed to do so at that time. So anyway, life went on, and there's lots of things, but in the spirit of time here, 3 months later, I went to my CEO's open door and explained and described what my experience had been like here. I worked in a female-dominated workforce, and so, well, actually it was predominantly a bit balanced, I guess, but often it can be a female-dominated workforce. And so with the data and the statistics that we know about women experiencing gendered violence, being 1 in 3 women will experience physical and or sexual violence in their lifetime, the odds of, with over 450 women at my workplace, I knew that it wasn't going to just happen to me, and the likelihoods of it happening for further women, predominantly women. You know, we know that this is a gendered issue, and that's not to say that it doesn't happen to men. It absolutely does, and to people of other identities, which we might touch on through our discussion. But I talked to him about, you know, as an organisation, what we needed to be doing to safeguard staff. So this was quite at the forefront of other organisations and the opportunities to lead the way. And so he endorsed me to work with the HR team, and I embarked on an arduous journey of workplace reform. And essentially I dived into the women's sector, seeking assistance from them, trying to navigate the sector to engage and bring on the help that I needed to effectively champion change at work. And it really, I found myself on the most incredible path that's ultimately led me here talking to you. Along the way, I've been really fortunate to connect with members of parliament, to CEOs in the women's sector and community service organisations, to be a witness for the ACTU's initial campaign for 10 days paid domestic and family violence leave several years ago that was successful in only attaining 5 days unpaid leave. I've been sharing my story publicly on stages and to workplaces, to working for White Ribbon in their workplace accreditation program. So I had a great privilege to work with many hundreds of organisations across the country to see and to support them in implementing a safe and respectful workplace processes in their organisations. I'm on lived experience advisory groups here in South Australia. I work closely with government. I was their lived experience delegate to the Women's Safety Summit in 2022. And I've co-founded a unique event called Pay Our Respects to Australian Murdered Women, which honours the women murdered due to gender violence each year here in Australia. And yeah, just a fierce advocate for the prevention of violence against women, for us, how we achieve gender equality, smash the patriarchy, but also to really focus on and help workplaces understand the role that they play in responding to and preventing violence against women and supporting staff who are experiencing or might experience forms of violence.
Gosh, I think if we ended this conversation here, people have already been able to get so much out of that in terms of what they can do in workplaces and what things shouldn't be being done, right? To people who have experienced the type of trauma that you're describing. Paul wrote in the chat, re-traumatization, oh dear. And it's interesting when you were sharing that, about having to repeat your story 3 times. We hear this for a range of other people from marginalized or underrepresented identities too, in terms of trans people having to tell 3-4 people about their gender identity and their gender affirmation process, perhaps. Or, there's a variety of people who observe different religions seeking, time off to respond to that. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders seeking leave for sorry purposes, etc. So it's a reoccurring theme that's happened across this show in terms of how workplaces get that right, in terms of how people know who to go to, and how we streamline that process. Is that some of the stuff that you've been looking at when working with organisations?
Yeah. And you're right, certainly the statistics of violence against women worsen for cultural and linguistically diverse women, women with a disability, and LGBTIQA plus people as well, which you touched on. But our First Nations women pay the greatest price due to racism, and they're 29 times more likely to be hospitalised with non-life-threatening non-life-threatening acts of violence than non-Aboriginal women. So it is quite horrific. And when workplaces are looking at the diversity of their workforce and the potential risk for what the impacts of, you can't just come to work anymore and leave who you are and everything at the front door. It just doesn't work like that anymore. You have to be able to bring your whole self to work, the good, the bad, and whatever else is going on. And the workplace is able to have the appropriate supports in place to enable people to come to work and function well if they can. And so it can be quite overwhelming for organisations to know what to do, how to deal with all of this stuff, and navigate, putting these systems in place. So I see it as a whole of organisation approach that needs to happen. You can't do one particular thing in isolation when we're dealing with domestic and family violence, when we're dealing with sexual harassment, when we're dealing with all forms of sexual violence. People can experience rape and sexual assault outside of the workplace and have that impact them during their time at work, their ability to function, their ability to perform, and for them to be safe whilst working. They may know their perpetrator or they may not know their perpetrator, and fear, especially if their work takes them out into the public realm, or how they get to and from work as well. And then there's also dealing with perpetrators in the workplace. How does a workplace demonstrate a zero tolerance approach in ensuring that they're managing their duty of care in providing that safe and respectful workplace culture?
Sometimes I think for some workplaces, this topic can seem quite overwhelming in terms of what they can do, how they can possibly create, positive, positive experiences for employees who are experiencing anything other than positivity, right? What are some of the, one of the first questions that comes to mind and is asked of me regularly is, how can an organisation first create a space where people do feel safe to come and share that they're experiencing things like you're describing, that they're experiencing that, and that is impacting their ability to perform at work? How do they create that psychological safety initially?
Yeah, it takes time. I think there's no silver bullet for it. And, domestic and family violence, sexual harassment, those kinds of behaviours that can occur at work or outside of work are also similar to, they intersect in our diversity, equity and inclusion work, that people of various diversities and experiences and identities, coming to work, how we ensure a safe and respectful workplace for people. So it is a whole of organisation approach that helps to create a sense of belonging in an organisation and a sense of trust and a culture of people being able to feel like they can come forward. And so I touched on, the term a whole of organisation approach, and it ultimately starts and it finishes with leadership. They are the most critical piece of the puzzle in setting the tone for what is acceptable and unacceptable behaviour, that they demonstrate a zero tolerance to inappropriate behaviour in the workplace. They role model it, they walk the talk, so that it is authentic and not tokenistic. And trust me, I've worked with plenty of tokenistic organisations in my time, and that they're prepared to invest, not just financially, but with training, with time, with ability, with connection to community, and various other ways to be accountable for how they create this culture so that it is safe for staff to come forward. So you can't just put in place a policy offering DV leave, which, as we know, the federal government has just enacted 10 days mandatory paid domestic and family violence leave for the national employment standards. And so every organisation, all large organisations, have to have that ready to roll by the 1st of February 2023, and all small business by the 1st of August 2023. So you have to put it in a policy. And then how are you going to communicate that to your workforce? But then the workforce know about it. And so people who are experiencing DV have to come forward and disclose in order to access that leave. Yeah. So, and we know that can be so traumatizing if the person, and for the person on the receiving end as well, if they don't know how to deal with that. When I disclosed to my manager, 9.5, 10 years ago, he just looked at me with his mouth open and didn't say a word. And I got embarrassed, didn't say a thing. And we never spoke about it again until about a year later. And I hit that crisis point. So it can be really unsafe for people. So to create that safety, managers need to be trained. All of staff need to be trained. There needs to be communication. You need to have, if you've got an employee assistance program, understanding 1-800 RESPECT is the national 24/7 provider for support. How you connect to your local domestic and family violence shelters and services in your locality, and establish relationships with them. So you've got a point of referral. And so it's also having that process, which is most critical, so that and it's communicated. So when somebody does come forward and they disclose to a manager, and it doesn't have to be their manager because they might not like their manager, that they can go to anybody, and that the manager or the person that's receiving the disclosure, it's often a colleague, knows what to do and what the process is. Do you go to the HR business partner? And we know HR is not always a safe place. But so what happens when you go to HR, and what's the process that then follows from there? How to do a workplace safety plan, how to ensure that there's risk management. And there's that term, nothing about us without us. So ensuring that the person who is experiencing this situation is included every step of the way. So, there's a lot of complexities in all of that. And I know we've only got half an hour, so, it is quite complex for an organisation to work through. But there are a number of organisations out there and consultants like myself and others who do work with organisations to help them navigate these new processes and things that they need to enact. And also for organisations that really genuinely want to create safe and respectful workplace cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that link to, reach out to people who actually understand the complexities of this and get them to guide you to create those safe spaces. And Maggie's put a comment in the chat. Amongst other things, Maggie said it's so important that workplaces can support victims of DV for so many reasons, but it's imperative to survival and preventing people to stay out of poverty too. So there couldn't be much more, reason or buy-in to do this type of work. And I think what you're highlighting there too is, with a lot of the gender equity work that I undertake, we see, or a lot of the accreditation programs require organisations to report how many people are accessing their DV leave, and quite often it's zero. And I think if it's zero and you're a big organisation, that's a really keen indicator that you need to do the type of work that you're describing to make sure people feel safe to actually access that leave. It's not enough to just have the policy.
And I've encountered so many managers or chief executives or boards that go, we don't have a problem here. Nobody comes forward. There's no issues with it here. And I'll just say, well, that's because nobody's safe enough to come forward and tell you, because I can guarantee you it's happening in your workplace.
Yeah.
And it's not just domestic and family violence, it's also sexual harassment. 1 in 2 women will experience sexual harassment in their lifetime. So, there's a lot of work that needs to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when organisations do start doing this work properly, that's when people start disclosing, and you see initially actually numbers go up. And that can actually be a positive thing because you're finally capturing the stuff that's happening in the org.
Yeah, and it's having those processes in payroll. And so, people do fear, some people will be willing to be open about it, like I was, whereas others will feel extreme shame and want it to be kept extremely confidential. So how do you set up payroll so that you can pay people? And that is so, what Maggie mentioned is exactly right. Economic security is critical. So, it's great that the government has implemented mandatory paid leave because it ensures that people at least are entitled to 10 days every year of domestic and family violence leave, and will be remunerated for it, which will help support them. And yeah, it's sorry, I think I've just lost my track here where I was going with that.
I think you were talking about the complexities of people, of who they want to know about the fact that
the payroll. Thank you for bringing me back to that. Yeah, the payroll. And so, there is certainly best practice in the nation on ways to implement processes within your organisation. So asking for evidence from a victim is not best practice. I didn't have any evidence. My first encounter with, the sector as it is was at the point of crisis, where I had to disappear. So asking for evidence is not best practice at all, and it can be re-traumatizing, that's for sure. And there are ways to be able to keep your own data and information on how many people are coming forward, the costs and the expenditure that you are. There's some incredible organisations that I've worked with that have unlimited domestic and family violence leave, and this was before the government's mandate. So, there's one organisation, I don't know if I should name them, but they're absolutely incredible in their offerings. And they have unlimited domestic and family violence leave. They give you $5,000 for every time you need money to move or for whatever cause. So and it's non-repayable. They're absolutely incredible in the supports that they put in place. They have volunteering opportunities with their workforce, with shelters, and their policy is really best practice. And when I spoke to their staff, they love their employer and they don't want to leave. So it's created that safe and respectful workplace. So they've obviously done a whole lot of other things authentically to help, from a whole of organisation perspective. But they're retaining their talent, they're retaining their staff because they feel safe and welcome and supported and taken care of when it comes to life matters. And so when people feel that way, their performance improves, morale improves, performance improves, which at the end of the day improves profitability. So there is enormous financial and economic benefit to workplaces to start looking at supporting their staff, whether it's through diversity, equity, inclusion, and domestic and family violence fits into the who we are and what we bring to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we're running a little short on time. This has been such a fascinating conversation. I'm learning so much myself. Can you talk a little bit about the 16 days of activism?
Yeah, sure.
What is it?
Yeah, so the 16 days of activism started back in 1981, I think, which was around acknowledging it was the Mirabella sisters in the Republic of Dominica who were brutally murdered in 1961. There were 3 sisters who were political activists for women's rights, were brutally murdered and sanctioned so by the president of the Dominican Republic. And so in 1981, the United Nations established the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, essentially in their name. And so that day occurs every year on the 25th of November. And so that is day one of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. And so the 16 days concludes on the 10th of December, which is International Human Rights Day. So it's a real opportunity. I mean, like Are You OK Day and every other day, you know, there's not one day in the year, but this is a great opportunity to raise awareness, to shine a spotlight on the issue of gendered violence, for organisations to get involved, and to have, I guess, a whole of nation opportunity to shine a spotlight on this issue.
Fantastic, and we're seeing some great initiatives that are being undertaken by organisations. But yes, I agree. It's not just a one-off thing, is it? There's a question here from Maggie. Keen to hear your thoughts about companies that request proof or evidence, as you say, to approve the leave. Obviously, this isn't best practice and completely inappropriate, but what advice would you give to victims that are requested to provide this?
Well, I guess if you have, it's tricky if it sits in policy and it's been endorsed, and that's what policy states. I would suggest, you know, you can reach out to, in South Australia, we have the Working Women's Centre. They're also in Queensland and the Northern Territory. If you feel comfortable to say to staff, you know, I don't have, you know, asking for evidence is not best practice. And it is actually quite, you know, traumatic for me to have to do this. I have to go to court. I have to do this. I have to do that. You know, I'm not going to lie, having to disclose, you know, and go and tell your story, you know, it's not like I'm going to be lying about this, because, you know, there's a lot of information that is divulged in that. So, you know, express your concern about the evidence, and depending on the response that's there, perhaps look to a manager that's an ally that might be able to support you in that. And then if you don't have any evidence, you know, you don't have any evidence. So I think it's a supportive and understanding organisation will hopefully be prepared to work with you. And that's the one thing I do say to employers is engage your lived experience network. You know, in embarking on such a undertaking of implementing a whole of organisation approach, reach out, you know, if there are lived experience that wish to work with management, executive to help embark on that work. But there are also women's safety services. You can also, you know, touch base with anyone in the women's sector for advice, or contact 1-800-RESPECT as well. They might be able to provide some advice. And there are other organisations that also, like Our Watch, they have their workplace equality and respect standards. The Respect at Work website, DV Workaware, just off the top of my head, are some great organisations who are providing resources for workplaces to, so you don't have to recreate the wheel. It's all, the practices are there to help support organisations.
Yeah, awesome. And you know, Teresa's written in the comments that she would also argue that victim survivors shouldn't have to explain why they don't have evidence, that allies within the organisations need to review what they do. And so I guess that's a really big call out to those listening today. And this goes across all the diversity, equity and inclusion work that's happening in organisations. The amount of unpaid, unrecognised labour being done by people who are purely seeking to create better experiences for them in the workplace, more inclusion and ability to perform at work and to be at their best. And quite often this is work that's done out of hours, outside position descriptions, and not remunerated or rewarded for or recognised. And I think we can do a lot better when it comes to that.
Absolutely.
We're right on time, so we better end up there. What you know, thank you for sharing your story and recognising the toll that takes on people to continually have to put forward their lived experience, to, you know, in the hope that people who are listening take that on and do become strong allies and create change in organisations, because I know that that's what you're about, and that's what we're all about here in these chats. So please, listeners, take on board what Stacey's had to say. Reach out to Stacey if you require help within your organisations. I think, Stacey, is LinkedIn the best way to find you, or is there? Yeah,
LinkedIn's great.
So that you'll have Stacey's profile. You can click on in this post and share this video around, so that more people can learn from what Stacey has shared with us today. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you all next time. Thanks, Stacey.